Well, I'm glad you've decided to be a part of this Connect group this week. This is week 2 in our series, Didn't See It Coming. Week 1, we talked about cynicism. This week, we're talking about compromise. And here's what we mean by compromise. The reality is we've all faced some tension between who we are and who we want to be. And that tension, that gap, that exists, that's when we've been compromised. And compromise is something that we don't set out to be. We don't set out to compromise our values or what we hold dear, but what we find is that over time, we end up becoming compromised by a bunch of little decisions that we make over time. It's easy to look at big business leaders or politicians and think, well, they were so greedy, they wanted so much power, that that's where they were compromised. But the reality for most of us is even if our family hasn't forsaken us, even if it hasn't cost us our job, we may sometimes look in the mirror and see these little small things that we have done and begin to question why we have done them. And so here is some words from Carrie that might be helpful as we think about how could you or I possibly be compromised. He says, there was a time when you weren't 100% honest with a client, or maybe many clients. You could have kept the promise, but you didn't. You haven't told your wife about your porn problem, but you tell yourself it's no big deal when you know deep down it's ruining your intimacy with her. You know you should be more present for your kids, but you hide behind your laptop because you can't handle the chaos of bedtime and don't want yet another fight with your wife. Work is just easier. At least people respect you there. You flirted with someone when your husband wasn't looking. Not a lot, but just enough to get a glance back that told you he found you attractive and desirable, and it made you feel better than it should have. You used to look down on women who took a third glass of wine, but now the pressure you feel juggling all the demands on you makes 3 drinks seem like no big deal. And sure, you talk about your friend behind her back in a way you never would to her face. But doesn't everyone? The subtle compromises we make day after day, the half-truths, the rationalizations, the excuses, create a gap between who we are and who we want to be. You're not a terrible person, but you're certainly not at your best either. And if you got dead honest with yourself, you'd say that although you haven't sold your soul to the devil, you've rented it. 1,000 little compromises have left you compromised. See, here's the reality for all of us in this day, that at the end of the day, character is what matters most. It matters more than our competency, more than all the skills that we have. At the end of our day, our character matters. See, for you and I, at the end of our lives, some point, someone who cared about us is going to have to write down some words to describe us. We call them obituaries. And so they'll write just a few lines to describe our life. In fact, what we're going to find at the end of our lives is that even after those words are written, is that our kids and our family or whoever loved us is going to summarize our lives in one sentence. They're going to say, my dad was, my mom was. These singular sentences will describe our whole life. And so for us, here's the thing. I want the people who know me the best, my family and friends, I want them to be the people who love me the most. And if we're not careful, if we don't work on our character, then that won't be true. It'll be our coworkers or our colleagues who will say the greatest things about us, and our family will go, they didn't know the real them. And I don't know about you, but I don't want that to be true for me. I want my family and friends to know the best parts about me. I want them to know and love me the most. And here's the reality. The compromises come because we become someone we don't really want to be. See, the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, this was true in his life as well. He found that he sometimes would lean towards things he didn't want to do. And so he writes these words in Romans chapter 7, verse 15. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Jumping to 18. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me. That's in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Verse 21, so I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? What Paul's saying is he knows who he wants to be, yet for some reason, sometimes he cannot become all that he wants to be. And what is it about your life or mine? What are the things that keep us from that? And so Carrie gives 5 gaps that we don't really think about, things that keep us drifting from who we want to be. And the first one is this. There's a gap between our public and our private life. That sometimes there's something in our public life that we have this persona, this perspective that we want people to see, when the reality is we're someone totally different in private. And so that's the first one. And now part of it could be no big deal. Like maybe we're cleaning our house because we have company coming over. We want them to think we live in a really clean place, but we know our kids leave stuff out and we want to keep it clean when they show up. That's probably not the big deal. The big deal is when you talk about grace, but you snap at your spouse and your kids and your coworkers. The big deal is when you say that people matter, but you make no time for anybody but yourself. Those are called gaps. See, we judge ourselves by intentions, and we judge others by their actions. Number 2, you're hiding things. If I knew what you're hiding, I wouldn't just say you're hiding things. I would tell you what you're hiding. But you and I have different things that we've probably been tempted to hide, to keep them from people, from someone we should know. We change our passwords so our spouses can't see into certain accounts. We do all kinds of things like that, and that leads us to that kind of place. Number 3, you fail to follow through on what you said. What if we shifted? What if we became people who underpromised and overdelivered, instead of become people who overpromise and underdeliver? Number 4, you justify your bad actions and decisions. I just had to. It's just who I am. It's okay. I just did this. It's not that big of a deal. And number 5, your life has become all about you. No one deserves to live a life that's just about them, because frankly, at the end of the day, it's going to leave us all feeling empty. And so what if we begin to work twice as hard on our character as we do our competency? I think this is in part what Jesus is trying to say when he's talking in the Sermon on the Mount. And Carey uses this illustration in his book, not really to talk about salvation, the idea of being saved, for Jesus to do some work in our heart, although that's a part of how we build our character. What Carey uses is this passage from Matthew chapter 7, which says this: "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." What he's saying is this: if we'll move to maturity, like spiritual maturity, Christian maturity, that's how we begin to build our character. Our character is built not through competency, not through just learning stuff, but by having our heart changed, by becoming more and more a people of love. And so here's a quote from Carey as he talks about this: "As you let Christ chisel away the stone of your soul, your character, heart, and life get remade into a closer resemblance of God himself. As your character is reshaped from the inside out, your love will flow more deeply. You'll stop judging others. You won't look at a person as an object to lust after. You won't hate your neighbor. In other words, your life will look much more like the life described in the Sermon on the Mount." See, here's the reality for us. It's easy for us to say, "Oh, I believe that this Jesus guy might be real, and he might have died for me, and I want to be a follower of him, and I want to receive whatever rewards that offers." That's one step. The next step is saying, "Hey, I want to become like him. I want to have my life reshaped. I want to be someone who is so radically defined by the love of Jesus." In our tradition, we talk about holiness, or the idea of being sanctified, this idea that God can do such a work to remake us, this other work of grace in which I am radically transformed. And this is the question we have to answer if we don't want to be compromised. Will you and I allow all of our life to be ruled by the reign of Christ? Will we allow others to help hold us accountable? Because the truth is we probably can't do this on our own. And will you and I commit to living for Jesus above all else? See, if we'll do those kinds of things, then we'll build our character, not just our capacity. That we won't be finding ourselves compromised, but we'll be beginning to grow, that our outside life will match our inside life, and those two things will go together. And so here's some ways Carey gives that we can make our outside match our inside. Number 1, take responsibility. At the end of the day, it's our responsibility to grow. It's no one else's fault when we come up short. It's ours. Number 2, make your talk match your walk. See, studies again and again show us that people lie in conversations all the time. I just read a study this week that 63% of people lie in a 10-minute conversation. And I'm not lying about that. That I actually did read. And what we find is this: we just don't tell the truth. And so then our talk and our walk never seem to match. And so one of the things that we begin to find is the more honest we are, the more people really appreciate it and like being around us. When Katie and I were newly married, we invited a couple, Zach and Sarah, over to our house for dinner. Sarah called my wife and she said, "Hey, by the way, we're not going to be able to come today." And Katie said, "Oh, was something wrong?" And Sarah responded, "No, Zach and I have just been fighting all day long and we think we'd be terrible company." The reality is we had way more respect for them after that conversation than we ever did before. And the third thing, which often sounds like but we sometimes use it to abuse other situations, but just don't take it out of context, that you put yourself first when it comes to personal growth. So you take time every day. We're all busy. It's an excuse, not a reason. Spend 30 minutes in the morning in quiet and solitude. Spend time every day in prayer and in the scriptures. Spend time letting people speak into your life hard truths that are hard to hear. And so put yourself first when it comes to personal growth. It doesn't mean ignore other people. It's not an excuse to say, "Oh, I don't have time for you anymore." It's a reason for us to begin to set things aside. in the morning, get up a half hour earlier, get up 10 minutes earlier. And see, here's the reality for us as we continue to do this. I think these words of care are helpful for us. Sadly, the people who claim to be the most mature Christians are often the most judgmental, divisive, and self-righteous. This isn't maturity at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. Jesus had a very different end in mind for the spiritually mature. He didn't define maturity by how much you know. He defined it by how much you love. So what if you and I worked on our character so much that we became defined by love, the love that Jesus talks about, the love that he gave his life for us? Because here's the reality when it comes to compromise. Our competency gets us in the room, but our character keeps us there.